This thing called political correctness has affected people, their lives, their livelihoods, and it really impacts how Christians, in many instances or some, are able or not allowed to preach the gospel or stand for what we believe as Christians, what the Word of God says. And so I want to revisit that issue today, and then maybe that'll generate more dialogue and we'll talk more about it. So when we talk about political correctness, we talked about it the last time. It is the power to influence one way or another the speech of people, and whether or not it's actually legal or illegal to forbid them. Remember, we talked about the Constitution, and we as Americans have the freedom of speech and the right to practice our faith. Although, you know that we've come against a brick wall in some instances when we simply try to use biblical terms to make a biblical point, or at least address the world as reality says. For example, if you see me and you call me sir, I think that's fine. Or you say, hey, guy, that's fine. But then in today's world, you might have to rethink that, especially if you're at work or in a position where someone has influence over you or authority over you. You might need to be careful. So I want to tell you that what I'll add to political correctness today will be this. Political correctness has a buddy, a companion, and it's called cancel culture. And so I'll give you one of the definitions, and you won't find cancel culture in the Bible. However, you will find many instances where the culture of Christianity is trying to be canceled. So it applies. It says, cancel culture, a practice or the practice or tendency of engaging in mass canceling as a way of expressing disapproval and exerting social pressure. It's a way of applying pressure to get you to do something they want you to do, or to stop you from doing something that you have every right to do. So political correctness tells you what you can't say, and the cancel culture is kind of the power behind it, or the hammer that's going to be used for them to have their way. And so these are powerful tools in the hands of, in my opinion, unscrupulous people. These are powerful tools. In order for political correctness and cancel culture to work, they need at least three things. And I'll give you a quick idea what those three things are. They need power, influence, and an enforcement arm, or the ability to carry out some kind of penalty of some kind to keep you from doing or saying what they want you to say, or to exert some kind of retribution or some kind of penalty on you if you insist upon doing it. That's a lot of weight. It carries a lot of weight. So they need power, they need influence, and they need an enforcement arm. And so that's what we're talking about today, political correctness along with its buddy, cancel culture. Now remember, things that people want to do that in many instances don't have the true rule of law behind them, they have to find other ways to get their way. For example, let's use the shroud or the covering, the veil of compassion. I care about you so much, and I'm so compassionate toward your plight or your situation. I want to make sure you're never offended. Have you gone through your life without being offended? And how about this? Have you at least in one instance been the offender? You see, the world doesn't work in a way that people live their lives trying not to offend you. And in fact, you don't live yours trying not to offend people, especially when you're simply exercising the rights that you have. And on this conversation right now, as an American citizen, to stand up for what you believe. And so you're just simply doing what you believe. But see, in order to keep people from being offended, there are some who are coming up with ways to try to have power, influence, and an enforcement arm to silence you. Now, remember, there was an instance in, I believe, the state of Indiana where a baker didn't want to violate their religious convictions by making a cake that had sexual connotations on it that disagreed with their faith. Well, they believe that what they believe of a sexual nature or their lifestyle has every right to be imposed upon society, and it should be embraced by everybody, even if it violates your biblical religious convictions. So the baker simply didn't want to do that. It violated their biblical conviction. And so what happens? You get the politically correct crowd on board against them, and then you go get the buddy, the cancel culture, and now we're going to cancel you out, make your business non-existent because you won't allow us to make you do what we want you to do. We want our belief to be yours. And so you have political correctness and you have its buddy, the cancel culture. In a moment, I'm going to give you the ultimate in the cancel culture and political correctness in a moment. We talked about it last time, about it being something that was used in the revolution in the Soviet Union, communism in 1917, around that time. But it's actually older than that. It just disguises itself in different ways from generation to generation. It's really a tool that the enemy has used well to silence things that the enemy did not want to be taught or spoken. And so the power, the influence, and the enforcement arm, when you have those things working, you can actually work, as we've seen, outside of the law. Outside of the law. Because when you have influence and people realize that your desire to accomplish what you want, if they don't go along, it could affect their livelihood. It could affect whether or not they're promoted on their job. It could even affect whether or not they keep their job. You see, so these things matter. Now, they might seem innocent. What does that have to do with the Bible? What does that have to do with Christianity? A lot. A lot. And so you and I, we need to know what we stand for. If someone's able to silence the gospel of Jesus Christ, it is the power of God unto salvation. You silence that. What if it had been silenced in your generation and you never heard the gospel? What would your eternity be? You see, it's really used by people for various reasons, but Satan is very often behind it. And we've watched how people have been made to cower, become more silent, more afraid, recognizing that their livelihoods could be impacted. And so it's changing our world. But we have a constitution, and I read it the last time we talked about political correctness. So I'm going to give you the ultimate, I believe, in what political correctness and the cancel culture has done, even though it goes back over 2,000 years. It may not seem like these are almost or the same practices, but in reality they will be, because they have the same thing: power, influence, and an enforcement arm. And so I'm going to take you back to the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus has just had communion with his disciples. They're there in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus is about to be arrested. Judas Iscariot has already been prompted by Satan to go and betray Jesus. And he's going to lead an army of soldiers to Jesus that he might be arrested. And then we're going to look at why. Why? In this story, you could be Jesus, because all you're doing is speaking the truth. And so we turn our Bibles to the Gospel of John, chapter 18, and we pick up in chapter 18, verse 28, where now Jesus has been arrested. And here, now let's see, where do I want to start first? Let's start in John 18, verse 12. It says this: Then the detachment of soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest, that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jewish leaders that it would be good if one man died for the people. So Caiaphas, he's going to try to silence speech that he doesn't want to be spoken. He wants Jesus silenced. And so we carry on in verse 19. It says, Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. He had been brought to Caiaphas, who was, in fact, the high priest. It says, I have spoken, now this is Jesus speaking, I have spoken openly to the world. I preach in church every Sunday. I stand down the corner square or the public square, and I just simply share the gospel. He says, I always taught in the synagogues or at the temple where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. I'm not running an insurrection here. He says, why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said. When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face. Is this the way you answer the high priest? He demanded. If I said something wrong, Jesus replied, testify as to what is wrong. I simply saw him and I said, how are you doing, sir? And he says, you can't refer to me that way. Today, I'm a ma'am. Remember, if it's just you and that other person, it's an isolated moment. Maybe you have an argument or not. But if there's power, influence, and an enforcement arm, now you got a problem. If it happens in your workplace, now you got a problem. And so, it says this, but if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Now he's about to send him to Caiaphas. He's about to send him. Annas has done his part. Now he's going to send him to his son-in-law, who is actually the real, in a sense, rule of law or in a real official government position. But Annas has influence. And so now we're in chapter 18. We're going to pick up, let's see, in verse 28. It says, Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. I'm reading this way so I can kind of carry you along a certain way. They don't like what Jesus is saying. They don't like it. He hasn't really broken any Roman law. Remember, Rome is the authority in those days. So Annas didn't like it, but he's not the high priest, but he has influence. He sends him to Caiaphas, who is the high priest. Caiaphas wants the same end result that Annas wants, but he doesn't have the power to do it right now because they were afraid of the people because Jesus had won a lot of converts. And so now they need the enforcement arm. They need the enforcement, that third component. Now they need it. So now they've taken Jesus to Pontius Pilate. It says, by now it was early in the morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. Now they're about to do something illegal, but they wanted to be clean so they could continue their religious practice. So Pilate came out to them and asked, what charges are you bringing against this man? If he were not a criminal, they replied, we would not have handed him over to you. Oh, well, okay, then what's his crime? All right, what's his crime? There's rule of law. I mean, if he breaks Roman law, I'll deal with him. Pilate says, take him yourselves and judge him by your own law. Do what you guys do. They said, we have no right to execute anyone. Without a real legal trial, they wanted and had already decided to execute Jesus. And remember, all he's done is exercised free speech, basically. But they have power, they have influence, and they're about to bring into play an enforcement arm. Like I said before, political correctness can only work, and cancel culture is when they have those three things. It doesn't mean they have the rule of law, they just have the force of law of some kind, or the ability to exact some kind of punishment on you based on the fact that they have influence and power. And now they have someone who could actually carry out the sentence. They said, we can't execute him, but you can. So they brought the enforcement of law into the matter. So it says, Pilate said, take him yourselves and judge him by your own law. But we have no right to execute anyone. They objected. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. So they prejudged Jesus to be guilty, simply speaking, and they may want to call it blasphemy, but Jesus is speaking the truth. And for us, we would say right now, wait a minute. I have a right to speak. I have a right to speak. So tell me, why did you just slap me? Because all I did was say, there goes a young man or a young lady. But we don't like that. We want you to call them what they want to be called. The truth is, that's a man, that's a woman. Our Bible says God created them in his own image, male and female. Well, no, we don't like that. You have to call them what we say. So now you have the political correct speech, trying to control speech, and then you have the cancel culture that comes behind them and say, we're going to rub you out. We're going to make your livelihood suffer. And then when you get that third element, the enforcement arm, you really got power. It says in verse 37, you are a king then? Said Pilate. Jesus answered, you say that I'm a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. What is truth? See, in a world where everything is shades of gray, what is truth? Well, the truth is Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him. That's the way it is. That's what we believe. But we're not going to force you to accept it. We're not going to even try to force you to accept it. In our houses of worship, in the places we go, in our homes, we simply practice our faith. And if you don't like it, you can't come along and create speech and a cancel culture and an enforcement arm to silence us. Because we have a constitution. We have a right to assemble. We have a right to speech. Our religion can't be abridged by government. But see, just because they have an enforcement arm, it doesn't make it legal. It just means they have an enforcement arm. And so it says, what is truth? Retorted Pilate. With this, he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, I find no basis for a charge against him. The guy hasn't done anything. He hasn't violated law. Well, violating political correctness is not breaking the law. It's not. That's simply put, it's not breaking the law. It's just offending somebody who says they're offended because they don't like what you said or what you stand for. He says, but it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at a time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews? They shouted back, no, not him. Give us Barabbas. Now, Barabbas had taken part in an insurrection, an uprising, or January 6th, I guess. He was a rabble-rouser. He actually opposed Rome. But you see, in the world we're in right now, what should be up is down, and what's down should be up. I'm sure you've been shocked and amazed by who goes to jail and what they go to jail for, and who is not put in jail based on what they did simply because they actually are on the right side of a political argument, political correctness, or cancel culture, and they actually have influence in certain circles, and so they get off. How about this? How many people from Antifa do you know who burned buildings and rioted and even killed people, actually went to jail? But try defending yourself today, legally defending yourself, and see what could happen to you. How about trying to stop someone from stealing in your store that you worked hard to build your business? You see, so Pilate is the influence, or Pilate is the enforcement arm. Pilate says, by law, I find no fault in this man. Or you know what? They're simply preaching their faith. You know what? I'm the governor of this state. I can't stop them from preaching their faith. We have a constitution. I can't make him bake you a cake just because you want him to and make it look like you want it to look, even though it violates his religious conviction. I can't do that. But political correctness, cancel culture, and someone who's willing to enforce this in their own way, whether it violates the law or not. You see, this stuff today is not new. There's nothing new under the sun. And so when they didn't like Jesus' speech, they wanted him dead. When they didn't like what he stood for, his faith, they wanted him dead. Who benefits from that more than anybody? Silencing the gospel of Jesus Christ. None other than Satan himself. And so, now we get to the part where influence and someone's personal desire to continue to climb the ladder of success, fame and fortune, here's where that comes into play. So now, Jesus is still before Pontius Pilate. We're in chapter 19. We're going to go to verse 4. It says, once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know I find no basis for a charge in him. He has not broken the law. When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, here is the man. Here he is. As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, crucify him, crucify him. But Pilate answered, you take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge in him. Third time, you're sharing the gospel. You're standing up for what you believe. You have not broken the law. And Pilate testifies to this fact. But, still there is influence, there's power, and someone who may have an enforcement arm that could actually serve to prevent you from climbing the ladder of success or losing your job, your livelihood, whatever the case. Now it says this. The Jewish leaders insisted, we have a law, and according to that law, he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. And he went back inside the palace. Where do you come from? He's talking to Jesus. Jesus said, but Jesus gave him no answer. Do you refuse to speak to me? Pilate said. Don't you realize I have power either to free you or crucify you? Don't you know I have the power to do this, whether justly or not? I can hurt you, Jesus. You better talk to me. I have power. You see, they brought Jesus to Pontius Pilate because he had power, or the enforcement arm to silence this guy, Jesus. And that's how it works. I don't like what you say. First, I'm going to try to cancel you. And if I don't, I'm going to try to use whatever enforcement arm is available to me to silence you. And in his case, kill him. So it says, Jesus answered, you would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above, from God. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free. Remember, he's the governor now. He's actually in control here. But Pilate is like any other man. He wants to climb the ladder of success too. So they say something to Pilate that now changes his power with their influence and his personal desire to climb the ladder of success. They use the ultimate and final weapon on him. It says, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, if you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Pilate's done. Pilate's toast. That's how that works. So now I'm going to threaten your livelihood. And if you don't do something, if you don't silence him, if you don't cancel that business, if you don't censor them, if you don't get rid of their Facebook account, if you don't silence them on Twitter, we're going to deal with you. But Pilate, just like people today, they want to climb the ladder of success. They have power and authority because of their position, not necessarily keeping the law or the rule of law, but with that power, that position, and their personal desire to succeed and achieve, they actually violate your right. The good thing in America, we do have redress in that same First Amendment that I read to you last week. But I'm simply saying political correctness has a companion called cancel culture. They need three things. They need power, they need influence, and an enforcement arm. And when they do, and Satan's behind it, ultimately, they want to silence the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is the power of God unto salvation. If they did it to Jesus, they'll do it to you. So, what does the Bible say about political correctness? You won't find the term in there. But you see a running thread throughout the whole Bible that there are those who have always and do now and will always want to silence the gospel of Jesus Christ. And one of the weapons of choice today, political correctness, cancel culture, with their third element, an enforcement arm. So talk about that with different people. Think about it. Watch the news. Just kind of watch the world as it turns and see what you see. The term is not in the Bible, but you know what I mean. So until we meet again next time, God bless you.